We're good to go. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Josie Duffy Rice. I am president of The Appeal, a news outlet that provides original coverage of the criminal justice system. And I'm honored to moderate today's webinar on the Emergency Action Plan. So we're going to get started and talk about what the Emergency Action Plan is, why we need it, how we can make it happen. But first, I'm just going to cover some basic logistics for the webinar. So we will have ASL interpreters available throughout the webinar. If you'd like, you can pin the interpreter screen so they are always visible, irrespective of the speaker. You can do that by pressing the 3 dots in the corner of the screen where the ASL interpreter is interpreting. So let us know if you need any help with that. You can send a message to the Justice Collaborative in the chat box if you need assistance. We also have a Spanish language interpreter. If you would like to hear this webinar in Spanish, please call the following number. I'll give you a second to get a pen or a phone. Or the number is 503-673-6803. If you call that number, you can hear this webinar in Spanish, and the number is also in the chat box for reference. So I'm so excited. We're all so excited to have some truly, truly amazing people joining us today. We have Representative Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts. She's the Deputy Majority Leader of the Illinois House, Jehan Gordon Booth of Illinois. We have Harris County Commissioner Rodney Ellis, Philadelphia Councilwoman Helen, the President of Color of Change, Rashad Robinson, the Executive Director of People's Action, Goehl, and Pastor Michael McBride. So thank you guys all for taking time out of your day and joining us. We're grateful that you're here. I wish we could do this in person. That would be lovely, but here we are, socializing over the internet. The speakers will talk for 5 minutes each about the Emergency Action Plan, the efforts to realize it throughout the country, and then we'll briefly recap the planks of the Emergency Action Plan and highlight the resources available. We'll end with a couple of short videos from organizers and elected officials across the country talking about the major strides that have been made. But before we get into it, I want to direct your attention to the website for the Emergency Action Plan, which is EAP Now. I'm going to share. Here comes one of the 2 hard parts of this. Hold on. Here we go. So this is the website. You can see EAP Now circled for your memory. Make sure to check it out. We'll show it again at the end. And in the meantime, just know that that's where you can find a ton of resources, these videos, and a recording of the webinar after this is over. And with that, we will get started. So let me give a little bit of information about why we're here. So today is one of the most daunting and challenging moments of our lifetime. And indeed, to call this moment challenging, I think is an understatement. Milton Friedman, one of the most extreme free market economists of the century, said, "Only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around." And it's telling that Friedman said that because we know that earlier crises have been used to make the unthinkable a reality, right? Not sensible, smart solutions to shrink the massive inequality in our system, protect workers and families, and use the government as a tool to protect the most vulnerable, but as a means to enrich the wealthiest among us, demonize and blame the most vulnerable in our community, and compound the radical racial and class inequality that we know already exists. So this crisis, like earlier ones, could go either way. It could well be the catalyst to shower aid on the wealthiest interests in society, including those most responsible for our current vulnerabilities, while offering next to nothing for most workers, wiping out small family savings, shuttering small businesses, exacerbating inequality, exacerbating unemployment. And we're 6 weeks into a crisis, again, that I think is unprecedented in modern times, and maybe any of our lifetimes. And we're going to see a political shift, whether that political shift exacerbates inequality, destroys working families, or whether it fundamentally reshapes the government and our economy to serve everyone else. And that depends on our leaders, and it depends on us. This is not an issue just a party or a debate between just the left and the right. It's not that simple. It's about the needs and the wants of everyday people. It's the people versus their leadership that has devoted their energy and resources to helping corporate America and their lobbyists. And this pandemic is highlighting that system. This is also our opportunity to stand up and make the transformational change that the time and people are calling for, because the numbers are clear. People overwhelmingly want very simple things. They want people to have safe housing. They want people to be able to have jobs and healthcare and access to food. They want people to keep communities safe. They want their voice heard in the democratic process. And that's what the Emergency Action Plan is. It's a plan that encompasses what the people want and need in this moment. And it has 4 major planks. 1, keep our communities safe. 2, guarantee housing for all. 3, build a care economy. And 4, make every vote matter. Today, we're going to talk not only about what the people want, but how we get there, how we push our leaders to enact transformational change for the people. And talking about all of this is why we're here today, and why several organizations, including Color of Change, Faith in Action, People's Action, Black Church PAC, Local Progress, and Demos, among many, many others, felt a moral calling to bring this webinar together and to offer ideas, interventions, demands, and requests for support. So we're aiming to create greater awareness of this crisis, to spark action across jurisdictions, across levels of government, to support community-organized mutual aid efforts, to protect the most vulnerable in our communities. And so specifically, we look forward to hearing our expert panelists and the audience present some of the concrete things that we can do, who is doing them, and if there are impediments, identifying the people who can make those changes happen, and finding out what resources are needed to get it done. So we're not going to be able to protect one another from the crisis without coordination, without communication, and without a commitment to our most vulnerable. We are truly, truly in this fight together. So first, I'd like to introduce Representative Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts' 7th Congressional District. Thank you so much. I think you're muted. Hold on.
I got it.
Okay.
You got me? Okay. Mic check, mic check. All right, very good. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a blessing to be in a virtual community with all of you. I think it is so important while we are physically distancing and doing our part to protect the health and safety of our frontline workforce, that we stay close in our organizing, that we continue to build community and to support one another. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to once again be in solidarity with you, albeit virtually. It is always an honor to share space with you. You are table shakers, you are justice seekers and citizen activists from throughout our country in pursuit of a more just and equitable world. I know wherever you are, real work is happening and real change is on the way. Now, we do find ourselves in unprecedented times, and we are seeing unprecedented hurt. We're witness to this every day. In an onslaught of tragic news, it's just incoming all around us. As this White House continues to fumble its response to this pandemic, we're working hard in Congress to conduct oversight and make sure that you have the information, resources, and support you need to protect yourselves, your loved ones, and each other. Today's rollout of the Emergency Action Plan is a timely one. Our fight in Congress, in state houses, and in city council chambers is only as effective as the will of the people, and we need all of you behind us. History has shown that vulnerable communities disproportionately bear the brunt of all of our nation's biggest crises, in large part because the federal government has consistently and historically left so many of its people behind. This pandemic has exposed painful truths about the impact of that failure. Black and brown communities disproportionately have higher rates of COVID-19 infection and death because our society failed to ensure that all of its people have adequate access to healthcare, decent jobs, and living wages, clean air, clean water, safe and stable homes. Let me be clear, I have no doubt that we will weather this storm. We will get through this pandemic, but simply making it through this pandemic is not good enough. This moment demands more. There is no going back to normal. We don't want that normal. We are bearing witness to structural inequities that have existed long before this pandemic hit. Inequities rooted in a legacy of racism and systemic and structural oppression. So it is not enough to tinker around the edges. We need a bold structural change to help protect the lives of all of our people. The Emergency Action Plan is a powerful roadmap for government at all levels to center the needs of every community, especially those most impacted by this pandemic. We know this virus does not discriminate by race, income, or immigration status, so neither should the relief efforts. We must ensure the health and safety of all people, and that means making healthcare accessible to everyone. Healthcare is not a luxury, it is a fundamental right. Our destinies and our freedoms are tied. No one should have to choose between whether or not to pay their rent or to pay their medical bills. It's outrageous for your healthcare to be tied to your job. More than 22 million people have filed for unemployment in the last 4 weeks. 22 million. And nearly half of them are uninsured and therefore unable to access the care they need in the midst of a pandemic. It's true. We do need a care economy. We need an economy that cares about all of its people. That's why I continue to fight for funding for our community health centers, for paid sick and family leave, for universal health care for all communities. And the thing that I've been banging the drum about since the very beginning of this, for racial and demographic data to better understand where we have historically fallen short. Our greatest wealth is the health of our people, and that must remain a top priority. The Emergency Action Plan also calls on us to prioritize safe communities and to protect our brothers and sisters behind the wall and in immigrant detention centers like our nursing homes. We know that these congregate settings make public health and public safety during this crisis nearly impossible. Already, we have seen the outbreak spread like wildfire in our nation's jails. This is unconscionable, and we must continue to speak out and support the safe release of those incarcerated, especially the medically vulnerable. Now, with the fourth stimulus package, we have a powerful opportunity to repair systemic injustice and ensure that all communities have the resources and supports needed to keep their families safe and healthy. I will continue to fight to ensure that we center all of our communities. As a government formed by the people, we need to ensure that all funding to combat the COVID-19 pandemic recognizes the humanity of everyone who calls our country their home. All of you have been on the front lines of this fight, some of you for generations. Today, I thank you for your continued partnership and most of all, your accountability, and call on all of us to renew our commitment to the pursuit of justice. This is an opportunity for us to enact solutions that put people first, that put you first. The Emergency Action Plan and your continued advocacy will help us do that, from organizing at the grassroots to organizing in state houses and in Washington. We truly are all in this together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Pressley. I think you highlight something that we've been talking a lot about this pandemic is really highlighting how the politicization of healthcare is a distraction. It's exposing how the health of the least protected among us affects all of us. And if we can sort of reframe this conversation to focus on people without the conventional politics, we're more likely to get what people want. Thank you so much. Next, we have the Deputy Majority Leader from the Illinois House of Representatives, the 92nd District, Jehan Gordon-Booth.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thank you. Good to be in solidarity with all of you today. The Emergency Action Plan is such a critical stride in terms of helping to reset the table in so many of our communities. Obviously, with this global pandemic, what we are seeing up close and personal is that the Emergency Action Plan is so pivotal because the response to this global pandemic is not only nationalized through federal government, it's not just state, but it's really very hyper-local. It's much more hyper-local than many of the issues that we talk about, those of us within this justice community. When you think about what are the things that are that are needed around really enacting an emergency action plan. There is a true need to have cohesive leadership. So designing and executing a rapid response to emergencies make this far more streamlined. We're seeing, I'm fortunate to live in a state where we do have some cohesive leadership, and that has been incredibly helpful in terms of ensuring that we have the ability to manage the rapid response to the emergency buckets of issues that we've seen. The emergency action plan is one that local communities will be able to take and arm and do the organizing that we all know is so critical to be able to gain the wins that we do on behalf of the very folks that we are in this space to fight for, particularly around the issues of safety and security, on the basic needs of housing, electricity, water, and food. All of those things are governed by entities within our own jurisdictions, within local government, within state government, that we have the ability to then identify and execute a plan around as outlined in the emergency action plan, working through housing authorities, utility companies, school districts to ensure the very basics are handled properly and with fidelity and love to the very folks that need us the most, to stand in the gap for them. The emergency action plan also really centers how it is that we protect the livelihoods of folks, for the very reasons that your livelihood is so connected to your family's safety and security, but it's also a part of our larger collective responsibility to one another. And it's incredibly ironic that, you know, folks in many parts of the country are talking about this pandemic as though the pandemic has created the impending crisis that's in front of us. And those of us that are on this line, we know that that is not the truth. We know that the very issues that we are fighting against and for, they've been here for generations, and now they're just merely being highlighted for the world to see. And as was stated earlier, this is our opportunity to reconstruct the kind of society that we know that we are worthy of. When thinking about the emergency action plan and what that means for our children, I think that this is the most important thing that we're doing in this space. And in terms of the physical needs, but also their emotional needs with respect to the sudden transition of what has happened to so many of them with the safest or the least or most well-resourced place in their lives, which is their school systems, which has been completely taken away from many of our children for at least the foreseeable future, certainly for the 2019-2020 school year. And so again, the emergency action plan really centers what it is that we should be doing in communities around ensuring that our children are held as harmless as possible throughout this. And we all know that throughout the work that we're involved in coordination with our governors teams in our respective states, as well as the local response from our mayors to our hospital systems, to our educational systems, we know that the provisions that are needed have to be centered for our most vulnerable, for our children, for the infirm, for the medically frail, for the young, for the Black, and for other people of color. And the only way that we're going to be able to center true action for the foreseeable future, so that we're not just in this moment in time, but that we have the ability to take this moment and allow the policy prescription that this moment is demanding, it's through data. And so the data collection of states in terms of not only where testing sites are going, but who's actually being privy to said tests, where resources are going in terms of the small business loans and many of the other allocations that have been made available. That data has to be made very, very clear. And so we have to make very specific demands that, again, are outlined in the emergency action plan to ensure that our policy prescription moving forward has the ability to meet the magnitude of the moment that we're in. I hope that this is the first of many conversations that we're able to have in this forum as a collective, because it is certainly going to require our collective action to move the powers that be into the position that we know that we need them to be in. And that is in complete solidarity with our brothers and sisters who need us the most right now.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. I think everything you said, the issues we're seeing here have been here for generations, and this is our chance, I like how you put it, to reshape society. And thank you so much for highlighting the importance of data. And thank you so much for your leadership in Illinois. You've been such a leader in safely bringing people home from jails and prisons. You've passed bills. You're working with Kim Foxx and with the governor. We really admire and appreciate your work. So thank you so much. Next, we have the Harris County Commissioner for Precinct 1, Rodney Ellis.
Josie, it's good to be with you and the Congresswoman and my friends from around the country. It's just so great to get to see folks, even if it's virtually. They're crazy, as I'm sure is the case with all of you. You know, one thing that strikes me is that long before this virus came along, a lot of the communities that we represent were already infected with a virus, the virus of inequity, the virus of poverty. You know, this is a moment that a lot of people have compared to the Great Depression. And when you look back on history during the Great Depression, some of these inequities that exist today were left by the wayside then. If you were Black, if you were African American, you could only get the benefit of getting a mortgage cheap or virtually free if you could move into a neighborhood that would take you. Under the GI Bill, you could only get free tuition to go to college if that was a college that would take you if you were Black, and there were very few. So I'm making a point that a lot of the inequities that existed before Corona showed up really were created by government inaction. So the reason I'm excited about this emergency action plan is it's a chance not just to put people back in the miserable condition they were in, but hopefully it's a chance to put them in a better position. Now, I want to focus on the basic human needs, food and shelter, you made reference to under that plan. That was a crisis that existed in my county. Houston is in Harris County. We're about 5 million people. That's larger than 26 or 27 states, a massive area. Congress, when it passed the relief bill, I was so happy. It was great. But here's the big problem. A big part of that relief went to multi-billion-dollar corporations, roughly about $500 billion in loans. Folks who had a tough time, but it's a tough position most of my constituents would love to be in. They want to overcome it, but they don't qualify. The federal aid has been woefully neglected for the most vulnerable among us who are already living paycheck to paycheck, and is forcing local governments like my county and my city of Houston to bear the brunt, the responsibility to try to step in and do the best that we can to make ends meet. Congress did a good job. We appreciate the $1,200 checks and cash assistance and folks who got it, but it wasn't universal. With some basic exceptions, you had to be a tax filer in order to qualify for that $1,200 check. And that means a lot of people were left behind. Roughly about 12% of the households in this country. Individuals who make less than $12,200 or heads of households who make less than $18,350 are not required to file tax returns. And as I stated, that's about 12% of the population. So that means that these are people and their families who, for the most part, were in need of relief but won't get it. They are the ones who we see in those long lines in New Orleans and around the Astrodome, NRG Stadium in Houston, in food banks. They're the homeless because they're cut off from wages. So that's why it's important in this plan that building a care economy plank is so important to me as part of the emergency action plan, because it's our collective responsibility as the richest, the wealthiest planet on earth. Make sure that we ensure that every community, everybody has at least those basic, very core necessities to make it. And in Harris County, we're doing what we can to help, but we can't do it alone without federal support. One of the first things we did was jump in to help the local food bank, not knowing whether or not we'd get reimbursed for the money or not. We changed our rules so that if you were a worker, truck driver or something, you couldn't get your hourly wage because there was no work to do online, then you could go and volunteer at a food bank. And we also put money up. The county provided resources so that our local food bank could hire about 180 additional workers, enroll dozens of county employees to go and do the work, distribute about 640,000 pounds of food, but it's still not enough. We create a small business program. We're checking around the country, and we do it again to make sure that we're doing something so we hit folks who are most vulnerable. And we want to make sure that we do something in line with that paycheck guarantee that is part of this plan. It's important to remember that many workers receive a payroll check and not an employment check, because nearly 160,000 people in this country get their health care through their employer. So if they don't get a paycheck, they won't be able to have health insurance. So that's why that paycheck guarantee provision is an extremely important policy as part of this. The data we pulled up from the Justice Collaborative shows that about 80%, 81% of the voters support direct payments from government to businesses in order to cover payroll expenses if they keep their workers employed during this emergency. So don't just give somebody a loan or give them a grant. Make sure it's tied to the people who make that business work. And that's an important plan. I want to make reference real briefly to the jail plan. I mean, you talk about an incubator to really breed COVID. And people who at some point in our county jails, many of them will go back into the local communities at some point. Most of them are there because they could not afford the post bail. And you got the workers there. You got healthcare workers there. And when you talk about a surge at hospitals, we have to provide people who are in these county jails healthcare. And if you have an outbreak and they have to take those beds, that means it impacts all of us. We haven't been successful here in Harris County. I admire folks in Cook County, over in Illinois. I think as I look around the country, you all are doing the best, and you're getting some cooperation from all units of government to go in and do what we can to make sure we keep our community safe, but not just keep people sitting in jail when they're vulnerable. So I'm glad to be a part of this dialogue, and I'm going to do as much as I can to advocate in the second largest state in the country to make sure that we get support for you, Congresswoman, or with your colleagues to implement it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Ellis. We're so grateful for what you all are doing in Houston. And I want to reemphasize what you said. Without additional federal aid to individuals, plus to state and local governments, you know, there's really no way to fully address the fallout from this virus. So thank you for all of your amazing work. Next, we have Philadelphia Councilmember at Large and the Vice Board Chair for Local Progress, Helen Gim.
Thank you so much, Josie. And it's an honor to join everybody on this call tonight about a world that we can build together. My name is Helen Gim. I'm an at-large member of Philadelphia City Council, Vice Chair of the Board of Local Progress, which is a national network of local municipal electeds who are fighting for racial and economic justice. Local Progress joins with the Justice Collaborative, with Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, and all of the partners who are on this call to fully endorse the Emergency Action Plan and to promote and mobilize all of these efforts, particularly at the municipal level. So from paid sick leave to eviction moratoriums to decarceration to equal access and justice for our immigrant communities, hundreds of elected officials all over the country at the local level have taken swift and meaningful action in this pandemic. I'm going to talk very specifically about the housing issue and why it's such a central issue in relief efforts that meet both the urgency of this moment, but also in our planning for recovery and wholeness, and particularly as it's exhibited in the Emergency Action Plan. So one of the things that we've been talking about is how active local members have been at the beginning and at the forefront of this pandemic, particularly around housing. In Ohio, for example, Local Progress members on the Columbus City Council led the charge to allocate $1 million for food access and emergency rental assistance. In San Francisco, Local Progress member Hillary Rosen passed legislation to secure 7,000 hotel rooms for the homeless, or for people who are experiencing homelessness. In Kingston, New York, which is a population of just 20,000, the alderwoman Michelle Lynch passed legislation that extended New York State's eviction moratorium for an additional 30 days, created a grace period for rent paybacks, and called on the state to provide rent forgiveness. And each and every day, we are seeing local leaders providing the comfort, leadership, and clarity that our communities desperately need in this moment. And here at home, I would say that, you know, to talk a little bit about Philadelphia, we're the poorest large city in the country, where almost 1 out of 4 residents lives below the poverty line. There's a 20-year life expectancy difference between zip codes that are less than half a mile apart. And so for us, the Emergency Action Plan is not just a platform of ideas. It is literally the difference between life and death amid inconceivable economic inequality in the midst of a global health crisis. Now, the week before our city issued a stay-at-home order, there were 566 evictions scheduled that week alone to be heard in our landlord-tenant court. So well before a health crisis shook our city, a local housing crisis has impacted tens of thousands of families here each day. Almost half of Philadelphians are renters. Over half of them are already cost burdened, spending over a third of their income on housing. So when COVID-19 closed in on our city, housing went right to the forefront of the agenda. Last month, our city council joined hundreds of municipalities all over the country to call for a successful moratorium on all evictions, foreclosures, and utility shutoffs. This was actually embraced by a number of different entities. Landlord associations called upon their members not to evict. Our utility companies not only met the call, but also started reconnecting families to both power and the internet, especially when children are home and needing to move to online learning. We joined a national call with council members all across the country for a nationwide rent and mortgage freeze. We've rented hotels here for people who are experiencing homelessness and returning citizens who have been released early from our prisons. Finally, we are talking about housing as a human right. And what I want people on this call to know is that this stuff is so popular. It is so popular and has been so deeply embraced, not only from formal entities and institutions, but in particular from our grassroots. A poll from Data for Progress and the Justice Collaborative showed that across party lines, voters want their government to protect people from losing their homes or experiencing financial distress from debt. 76% of respondents would support a suspend and forgive rent program under which government, not just the renters, would compensate landlords for lost rental income for as long as there was a state of emergency. It's why so many people embraced Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's Housing as a Human Right Act, which was announced last week, that would also cancel rent and mortgage payments and have them covered by the government. It's received enormous accolades here at the grassroots, and it's why we're here talking about housing as an essential component of any emergency action plan. Again, what we've made clear about housing is that housing is economic security. Housing is the public health. It always was, but we can't afford to let people forget that when we start to move towards reopening the nation. Now we're headed into another rent due date on May 1st, and we really have to recognize what's at stake. The 22 million Americans who filed for unemployment in the last month alone translates to 1.3 million Pennsylvanians here in my state who have filed for unemployment. A National Trade Association for the apartment industry indicates that as many as 1/3 of renters did not make their April rent, placing many small landlords at grave financial risk, and we expect that to be even worse in May. Housing expert Matthew Desmond has often talked that if you have a child, you are 3 times more likely to be evicted. And our own data here in Philadelphia shows that evictions in our city overwhelmingly targets and impacts Black mothers who are heads of their households. So when this emergency order is lifted, we cannot afford to pack our courts with hundreds of families once again facing the trauma of eviction. We cannot afford to pack people into shelters and call that housing. This is why I'm proud to be on the call to support the urgent need for local, state, and federal action on housing and to support all the components of the emergency action plan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Gim, for the work that you've been doing in Philadelphia, for the work that Local Progress has been doing. I was the second staff person ever at Local Progress, so I'm especially thrilled about seeing the incredible stuff that's going on there. We know that the housing crisis is only going to get worse with millions of Americans out of work. The 30% of people who couldn't pay their rent in April, just like you just said, are not going to be able to pay it in May or come up with 3 months rent later. And without suspend and forgive policies, we're going to see more evictions. We're going to see more devastation. We'll go over later how anyone can use a toolkit to advocate for this policy and others. But for now, let's move on to my friend, the president of Color of Change, Rashad Robinson.
Thank you, Josie. And it's great to be on this call with so many heroes and friends, folks whose work I've admired for years and who have stood with us at Color of Change. Color of Change as a force driven by 1.7 million Black folks and allies of every race is proud to stand with this platform and to stand with the demands that we are putting before our federal government to ensure that we put forward the policies to get us out of this. You know, Color of Change knows a little something about a crisis. We were actually founded in the aftermath of a flood, which was Hurricane Katrina. It was caused by bad decision makers, and it turned into a life-altering disaster by bad decision makers. Black folks were literally on their roofs begging for the government to do something, and they were left to die. And like with so many crises, Katrina illustrated things that we already knew: geographic segregation, generational poverty, the impacts of what we've done to our planet. And here we are at COVID, once again, having a crisis fueled by bad decision makers that illustrates things that we already knew. At the heart of this crisis and at the heart of our work to get out of it will be our leaders nervous about disappointing our community? Are we building the type of political power to force those in power to do the things that we need them to do? And so I want to talk a little bit about this from a racial justice perspective, because far too often in these issues, racial justice can be seen as charity, when I contend that racial justice is strategy. Only when we undo the forces that have put us in this place, from race to gender and class, do we actually begin to build a new world. Banks continue to give mortgages to white people at twice the rate of Black people, cutting Black people out of the gifts everyone else is getting. Banks are getting away with denying Black people mortgages twice as much as white people, and our policies are letting them do that. And we will only see that continue to take place through the ways in which the CARE Act has rolled out small business loans if they only go through big banks. So it's not that we need to put more money into a bad plan, but we need a better plan. And that is how we actually put a racial justice lens. It's not that Black Americans are twice as likely to be denied mortgages. It's that banks continue to give mortgages to white people at twice the rate of Black people. It is not that Black people are the problem. Black people are the solution. It is about putting in place the policies and practices that force institutions to actually have to respond and do something different. Federal policy has essentially, in so many ways, handed down a death sentence, not just for Black lives, but for Black businesses. Right now, they should be giving us a lifeline, and you've all seen the suffering and the stats. But there is an alternative approach that we can win, and we must put that in place with the right strategy. I'm here in my apartment in New York City. I've been here for over a month now. I'm used to being on the road, and I actually live by a police, fire, and ambulance station. And you know, the only thing that I really hear on a day-to-day basis is ambulances up and down the streets as our hospitals fill up. The issue, the way in which these policies have created a man-made disaster in cities around this country that will continue to travel as more and more bad decisions are made is why we need an emergency action plan now. This plan that deals with our prisons, that looks at our housing, that deals with our economic recovery and more, is exactly the type of forward-thinking plan that will deal with all of the ways in which federal policy has created disproportionate impacts on our community. But the only way any plan works is if we put people power behind it. That is how we get out of a crisis. It is not simply about what we write on paper, but it's about the ways in which we stand up and fight for justice. And that is why we have to put just as much energy about making this policy real and making this policy powerful as we do at talking about this policy. Webinars alone will not solve this problem. Action, building power, and grassroots energy will solve the problems we're facing and build us the power to face a new day. And so at Color of Change, we are proud to not only stand with this action plan, but also to push forward the work we are doing through the blackresponse.org. The blackresponse.org is the platform that we are moving to work with local and state organizations all around the country, as well as national organizations, to ensure that racial justice is a driver for any of the change that we are working to get out. That is how we make justice real. That is how we make freedom a possibility. And that is how we build the power to get out of this crisis that we are in. Thank you for having me on this call. And I hope that we will not just sit back and feel good about a plan, but we will stand up, push forward, and fight to make the plan a reality. That means holding all of our elected leaders accountable and pushing for more power to make the rules different. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, as always, Rashad. Thank you for emphasizing the need for people power behind the policy, behind the webinar, behind the plans. If we don't have movement by people, this isn't going to happen. And thank you again for underscoring the racial impact of this crisis. Black people, as always throughout American history, are suffering disproportionately. And now is the opportunity to try to rectify some of that suffering. Next, we have the Executive Director of People's Action, George Goehl.
Hey, thanks, Josie. Really appreciate everything that folks have said. Good to hear you, Rashad. I think this pandemic is awaking a sleeping giant. I just feel like right now you can see people across the country, and that could be urban folks, suburban, rural, are trying to make meaning of what's happening, trying to make meaning of our failure to stay in front of this virus, making meaning of the disparities that we've talked about on this call, and making meaning of our inability to ensure people have basic needs. And I think out of this, a new common sense is emerging in America. In exit poll after exit poll in the presidential primary, we saw widespread support among voters for big ideas like Medicare for all and free college at public universities. And that was before we were hit by a global pandemic. Josie said this: crises create moments of great danger, and we can all see that in the daily loss of life and livelihood sweeping our country. And they also lay our systems bare for all to see. There's really nowhere to hide right now. And plain and simple, this is a politicizing moment for people in America. And so we're seeing everyday people starting to ask more questions. It reminds me of some of the questions people started to ask after the financial crisis. Like, why don't we have a healthcare infrastructure needed to nail this moment? Why don't we have the kind of worker protections that are in place in many other countries? And why aren't we demanding more from the big corporations that we're bailing out? These questions are being asked by people across partisan lines. And People's Action, we run a big rural organizing program in states across the country. We're hearing these same questions from rural folks that don't identify as progressive or as Democrats. So I think a lot of people who maybe were not tuned into what was happening are having a new experience of what works and what doesn't in the US. And yet, while there's an awakening in the meaning making with people across the country, there's clearly a worldview that says think small and favor down, trickle down policies that holds power for much of Washington. And we need the electeds from both parties to catch up with this new common sense. Three things in the emergency action plan that we're most focused on. I think everything in the plan is excellent. We fully endorse it. But on any given day, millions of people are an unexpected cost or loss of income away from losing their mortgage or getting kicked out of their apartment. That is now tens of millions of people facing that right now. So we need to pass Ilhan Omar's Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act. Tens of millions of people have their insurance tied to their jobs. We're seeing that that's not going to work. We need to provide universal no-cost health care insurance, including mental health treatment, for as long as the nation remains in a state of emergency. And as others have said, we just need to provide people with money, and no less than $2,000 per month. Honestly, if we don't do this, it's going to be a mighty tough road to hoe for tens of millions of people and the country as a whole. It's a moment for organizing. Millions of people are making meaning of this moment. We need to bring people across party lines into the fold and then bring pressure to bear on the electeds in both parties who've not gotten the memo that a new common sense is emerging in this country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, George. I think I love what you said. This is basically about common sense, right? This movement and this plan are about common sense, common decency. We're not focused on what people need and default to the easy political divides or the easy platitudes. We're giving power to the establishment and not to people. I want to remind everyone of the website with resources and information about the emergency action plan. Please go to eapnow.com for more information. We'll talk more about it at the end, but I just wanted to remind everybody quickly. So our last speaker, but certainly not the least, is the Director of Faith in Action's Live Free campaign and co-founder of Black Church PAC, Pastor Michael McBride. Thank you so much for joining us.
It is indeed a pleasure to be here with everyone, and I share all of the sentiments of my comrades and loved ones who have spoken before. Certainly, we are living in very perilous times, and I want to invoke the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who in, I believe, 1968 said that our country needs brigades of ambulance drivers who are willing to ignore the red lights of this present system until this emergency is solved. And I believe that many of us are opting into being one of those ambulance drivers. This emergency action plan perhaps is a roadmap for all of us to not only buy into, but to continue to amplify beyond our own parochial or limited spaces. And so on behalf of the Faith in Action Network, certainly we are very excited to participate not only in contributing to this action plan, but also helping to make it much more known among all of our elected officials and decision makers across the country. It is indeed a fact that part of the problem we have is a problem of compassion. It is a moral conundrum. It is indeed a gap in the way in which we respond to the least of these. We hear the president and many others referring to this as a war on an invisible enemy, and I believe, and many of us believe, that our language must indeed change. This is not a war. When we have wars, people make money. People create enemies out of one another. There is a narrative of scarcity. We believe that our approach has to be one of humanitarianism, of belonging, that in these moments, we are being called to our best selves. We respond with radical charity, radical generosity, radical solidarity. So in our network, a network that is a multiracial network, a network that is multi-faith, that attempts to work across the hard lines of difference that manifest themselves through both perceived and real challenges, we think that we must continue to prioritize the many ways that we flip and invert the system of priorities in this country. If it is indeed the case that prisons and jails and detention centers and the elderly, frontline and essential workers do not have the necessary immediate PPE they need to at least slow down the spread of the virus. And what does it mean for we then to prioritize their well-being? If it is indeed the case that we know even in this moment that budgets are being slashed and cut in some of our most under-resourced communities across the country, we heard from folks in New York and in Chicago and other places that they're getting ready to cancel and cut summer job programs for young people. What does this mean? What are we leaving to our young people in an already very tenuous economic condition? We know that we must then have the imagination to reimagine the economy in a way where it works for all. We're so excited to hear Pope Francis join many of us across the spectrum of our justice spaces to start calling for a basic income, just a radical reorienting of what does it mean for us to put forth some of the kind of solutions that we know match the moment, the emergency of this moment. And so we stand together, certainly wanting to ensure that we free all of our loved ones who are incarcerated, that they get a chance to come home and get the proper care that they need, that we indeed ensure that we take good care of those who are infirmed, even those who may have to remain incarcerated, that we do not withhold life-saving PPE and health care for them. And of course, we must expand our health care options to those so we can get preventive care, indeed in Black and brown communities. And now we're hearing just terrible reports of how this is decimating Native communities. Whole communities are being decimated by this particular epidemic. And so we just want to stand and offer a powerful moral affirmation of this particular effort and continue to call us all into another way of imagining the new world. If we don't do that, then we will continue to allow these systems that are indeed predatory, that are unjust, even the solutions they roll out do not necessarily take care of the particular institutions that are serving our communities. I'll just close with this. Some of our faith leaders and others who were applying for the payment protection program find that they are being disproportionately locked out of that program, that the banking industry in many respects are repeating the sins of their most immediate past. It is important for us in this moment to ensure that we are indeed calling a spade a spade. This system and this leadership that we have at the federal level is immoral. They are not up to the task to lead a nation of diverse, very complex constituencies into a shared belonging future. And that is our role, that is our job. Put forth these emergency action plans and amplify them, out-organize those who would oppose them, and stand in solidarity together all across this country, all across our lines of difference, political parties, religion, sexual orientation, race, gender, and let's ensure that we have a plan that literally saves lives and ensures a future for all of us. So God bless everyone. Very glad to be here with you. And let's rock. Let's run some red lights and let's save some lives.
Thank you so much, Pastor McBride. I love what you said about the narrative of war and about how this is an opportunity to reimagine. It's a great transition into talking more in depth about the emergency action plan. Thank you so much. And thank you all of our speakers for joining us. I feel very honored to be here with you all. And I'm very grateful for the incredible work that you all are doing tirelessly every day in such an uncertain moment. So thank you. So these aren't all of the issues. I'm gonna share my screen. This is the part I lose sleep over, guys. So let's see if I can actually pull it off. Here we go. I did it, I think. Can everybody see my screen? Thumbs up? Okay, cool. So again, eapnow.com. So we're going to sort of go through the planks of the plan. And again, these aren't all of the issues, of course, but these are important proxy issues. And the emergency action plan that we have, you know, are proxies for the larger story that we're trying to tell. To transform our system, we need to prioritize an issue agenda which flows from our big story, and it serves as a proxy set of issues for a broader, more comprehensive vision. I'm gonna move through the slides. So the first, sorry, I have to minimize you all, even though your faces are beautiful. I have to move you just briefly. So the first plank of the emergency action plan is to keep our community safe, which obviously we have an entire structure in this country, an entire structure that is kind of politicized the language of safety. But when we talk about safety, we mean something different. This plank of the plan is based on the idea that to keep our communities truly safe during this global pandemic, we must start by protecting the most vulnerable among us. And that entails getting as many people out of jails, prisons, and detention centers as possible, making sure that people stay out of state custody by minimizing arrests, and creating the infrastructure to care for the most vulnerable on our streets by providing housing for those without homes, without clearing housing encampments, and providing targeted assistance to those who are the most vulnerable. We also have our second plank, which is guarantee housing for all. Safe housing is a right, and it is imperative during this pandemic that everyone, including people without housing, have shelter and access to water in order to comply with social distancing recommendations and effectively stop the spread of this virus. This is a question of public health. With millions losing their job, no one should fear losing the roof over their head, over their family's head, because they're struggling to pay their rent, mortgage, utility bills. We need to expand resources for the unhoused, halt evictions, foreclosures, and utility shutoffs, as well as freeze and forgive rent and mortgage payments in order to ensure that everyone is able to weather this crisis with a safe place to live and without incurring debilitating debt. I gave away what the next slide was, but let me go back. Okay. The third plank is build a care economy. So the economic collapse that was triggered by this pandemic, by this crisis, including high unemployment, has made it impossible for millions of people to just survive, right? To eat, to pay their bills, to provide for their families. So we need to ensure that people have everything they need to survive this crisis, but also build the infrastructure long-term for a society that cares for all of its members. So one thing I really want to pull out here is that we need to pass the Paycheck Guarantee Act, which more than 70% of people support. The act would guarantee that workers keep their paycheck, rehire people who lost their jobs or faced a reduction in hours, and cover basic business expenses such as rent, so that workers have a job to return to when the economy reopens. And you can see the other parts of each plank on the screen. The last one is make every vote matter. We know that this pandemic is coming at a particularly scary time when, one of the major voting years that comes, voting is important every year, but obviously this year holds a special weight. And we want to make sure that this pandemic doesn't threaten our democracy, that it's not used by opportunistic forces to reduce the opportunity, reduce the power of the vote. So we need to make sure that this year's election and all future elections are fair, safe, accessible, and secure. We need to push elected officials to embrace a comprehensive, proactive agenda to expand the franchise. We need to strengthen political participation, protect access to the franchise in future elections by making voting by mail robust and accessible, expand and automate voter registration, expand early voting, and create safe and sanitary in-person voting. Make it possible for people to vote without risking their health. And again, all of this is at eapnow.com. So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about the toolkit, which you can find online. So in order to use the toolkit, you can just start by picking a plank. You can see two of them right here. Once you've selected a plank, you can see a lot more resources that are usable for anyone. You can find tools like sample demand letters for every level of government. You can find a power map to help you identify the right decision maker to approach, find talking points more. So here I chose the demand letter to the governor. My governor is Brian Kemp. He needs it. So this is, if you choose the demand letter, you can see that there's an automatic template in Google Docs that you can fill in. You can tailor, you can use your organization resources, you can fill it in as an individual. We want to make sure that this is accessible to anyone that is interested in reaching out to their elected officials and making these demands. So I want to shout out of many of the people who are doing incredible work around this issue, and talk about some of the leaders in this movement. So Austin City Council members Delia Garza and Greg, sorry, I lost my, okay, now can you guys see my screen? Okay. Austin City Council members Delia Garza and Greg Caesar saw that 3,000 cars were lined up in Travis County, Texas, where Austin is, for food from a food bank. So they headed the effort to pass Austin's $15 million Relief and Estate Emergency Fund, RISE, the RISE Fund, which improved food access, provided rental or mortgage assistance, provided assistance with utility bills, medical expenses. Just a really, really incredible action by Austin City Council members. We also have Oakland City Council member Nikki Fortunato Bass, who headed efforts for the Oakland City Council to pass the strongest eviction protections in California, protecting businesses, nonprofits, and renters. So we have a few videos here from some of the people around the country who've been doing the work we've been talking about on this webinar. So before we end, I'm going to play these videos just so you can hear a little bit more from people on the ground, from other elected officials about the importance of this.
Hi, it's Greg from the Austin City Council, and in our city, just like places all over the country, we're seeing thousands of cars lining up for the food bank. We have all these folks that we're telling not to work because we need to protect their lives. But at the same time, in a country where so many people live paycheck to paycheck, if they're told they can't work, then there's a big question of how it is they're going to survive. Our federal government isn't providing enough support to people, and in some cases, like immigrant families, they aren't providing any support. And that's why our city established a $15 million RISE fund, an emergency fund coming out of the city's rainy day fund, and it's going to start providing help to people starting today to help tens of thousands of Austin families have food on the table, to be able to get their medicine, and we're going to be providing direct financial support to families, especially those that aren't getting any form of state or federal assistance, because everybody in our community is essential and everyone deserves help, which is why we've established this multi-million-dollar fund.
Income Women has been working at the grassroots level to make sure that Congress includes regular cash payments to people as part of the next stimulus package. We've identified what we think are the four most important components to include in this. 1, payments must be regular and monthly, no single one-time payment. 2, payments must be substantial. $2,000 per month per adult and $500 per month per child is the minimum of what we should be providing. 3, we must make sure that as many people as possible receive these funds. No means testing should be employed when it comes to determining who should qualify. And 4, we need to make sure that the mechanisms for distribution fall outside of traditional models so that people who are bankless or homeless are still able to receive the funds. Prepaid debit cards are a great solution to this. If we can make sure that the next stimulus includes these 4 components, we know that we are going to be able to reach and support more people than we were under the CARES Act.
What really resonated with the RAP member groups and what really, like connected with us was the Homes for All, the Omar's bill. It talks about project-based, permanent, affordable housing units, which should be the model for when we think about affordable housing. It should be available throughout the country. This asinine system of giving people vouchers or 20-year waiting lists to get public housing, none of that's necessary. None of that's, because we can't afford it. Christ, our without housing report shows you for a couple of less aircraft carriers and some less fighter jets and 1 or 2 less destroyers, we would have all the affordable housing people could possibly need. So get off of the we can't afford it. It's about racism and classism and the structure of how our government functions and who our government serves. And when we allow our organizing to separate these issues out, you look in our jails, you look in our shelters, you look in our prisons, you look in our streets, and in our court systems, this is about racism. This is about classism. This is how the system functions, and we need to universalize all our demands at all times so that we're talking about all people.
Hello, my name is Rose Khan, and I'm here on behalf of the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. We are a national organization with offices throughout California and DC. We are lawyers for the movement. Our goal is to support, not supplant, those directly impacted people on the front lines who will always be the beacons of hope, charting the course for our victory. We at the ILRC do not view the quest for immigrant rights as separate from the quest for justice for all people. We know our liberation is bound together. A full 97% of people who are in deportation proceedings are there as a result of contact with the criminal legal system. Though immigration is governed at the federal level, who ends up in the deportation system is overwhelmingly a matter controlled by local and state actors, the police who arrest, the prosecutors who charge and convict, the sheriffs who collaborate with ICE. We know that the path towards victory depends on us being smart and strategic in aligning our fights against criminalization and incarceration. Since the COVID crisis emerged, and frankly long before, we've been hard at work with partners from all sectors, not only calling for back-end solutions to immediately release people from the medical neglect rampant in jails, prisons, and detention facilities, but also to address the front end forces that pace people in the criminalization and deportation pipeline to begin with. Our post-COVID responses in California, Texas, and beyond have included advocating locally to push police to stop arresting and DAs to stop charging certain criminal offenses, to expand cite and release and pre-charge diversion programs. We have put together a series of demands to ensure that when people are released from jails and prisons, these are responsible releases that don't lead to those same individuals immediately being placed into ICE custody. Last year in California, we passed the first law in the country barring the use of all private prisons, immigration or otherwise. But we see GEO Group and other private jailers trying to skirt that law. They are proposing 3 new facilities in California alone this coming week, with hearings being held in rural areas despite shelter-in-place orders. We are calling on the California Attorney General and Governor to intervene and stop these new contracts. Our immigration prisons are at a tipping point, with more confirmed cases reported daily. In 4 out of 5 of the prisons in California, our incarcerated loved ones are conducting a hunger strike to express their absolute terror about this pandemic. ICE's own standard of review to determine who is released do not extend to people who have even a simple possession or shoplifting offense on the record. This presents an unmitigated public health crisis. As the illness spreads, ICE does not have the capacity to care for sick people, and the protocol is to release individuals to local, rural hospitals, further taxing scarce healthcare resources. We must release people now. And we must ensure that those who are released have the resources needed to thrive. In Houston, San Antonio, and throughout Texas, we've been working with local electeds to create undocumented worker funds to extend much needed aid to those who are left out of the Federal CARES Act. If you're interested in finding out more about how to build campaigns that connect the needs of citizens and non-citizens, please reach out to us at ilrc.org. Thank you.
This is our last video.
I'm Sabeel Rahman, and I'm the president of DEMOS, a think and do tank that powers the movement for an inclusive democracy. Now, this COVID crisis is not just a crisis of public health. It's also threatening the mass disenfranchisement of Black and Brown communities. That's why we need policies like same-day and online registration, expansive vote by mail, and safe in-person balloting. DEMOS is fighting for these reforms along with our grassroots partners in the states, bringing lawsuits in places like Florida and Ohio to try to win these changes. If we're successful, we can save not only our November democracy, but end the practices of voter suppression for the long run.
Okay, so thank you everyone. We're gonna wrap up now. Thank you so much to all of you who joined us on this call. Thank you to Color of Change, to Faith in Action, DEMOS, Local Progress, Black Church PAC, and People's Action for, all the work you do every day and for making this webinar happen. And thank you to our elected officials who joined, who are fighting for these policies. We see you and we're grateful. Thank you to the ASL and Spanish interpreters for their amazing work today. And thank you to each and every one of the local, state, and national groups doing this important work. Moms for Housing in Oakland, Silicon Valley Debug, ILRC, and so many more. We're so grateful for all of your work. We can't say it enough. And again, please take advantage of the resources at eapnow.com, eapnow.com. Just say it a million times today, dream about it, think about it, and use it. There's a ton there that we think will be really helpful, and we think the toolkit is a great resource. For more information, you can email info@eapnow.com. I said to say it a million times and then I almost mispronounced it, but it's eapnow.com, info@eapnow.com for questions. Supporters@eapnow.com if your group would like to endorse the platform. Again, that's supporters@eapnow.com, and media@eapnow.com for media inquiries. Thank you all so much for joining us. If you have any more questions, please reach out, and we'll be pushing forward on this in the days to come. So thank you so much. Oh, and this webinar was recorded, so it will be available later on the website. So you can watch it again if you feel so inclined, or share it with the people that you think should see it. So thank you so much.